The darknet, ladies and gentlemen, has already arrived in our lives, whether we like it or not. So in this iceberg that we see, the iceberg on top of, let's consider this iceberg as the internet. What you can see on top of the water is the superficial net, which you and I access using search engines like Google, Facebook or Bing. Below the water is the big chunk. This is the deep net, which is a lot of content is available, which normal search engines will not access, but specialized search engines will access. But if you go to the last bit, the top or the bottommost bit of the iceberg, that's the darknet. Now, darknet is a place, ladies and gentlemen, which actually threatens to completely change our conceptions of how the internet is going to be. How many of you here have visited the darknet? Anyone? So I see four hands there who have visited the darknet. Now, the darknet in a layman's language is a place where you can't go normally. You will have to use a specialized browser known as the Onion Router browser or the Tor browser. That browser hides you behind various layers of anonymity so that your real identity is hidden. Nobody knows who is who on the darknet. It's a place where cybercrime is available as a way of life, as an economic model. It's a place where despite dishonesty, despite all the illegalities happening there is still honesty. If you order something, it'll be done. There are websites which are promising you that they will kill anybody in the world, barring the top 10 people in the world, and barring children and women, provided you pay them money. There are all kinds of drugs, ammunitions, anything illegal that you haven't found out in the real world is all out on the darknet. And it's this darknet issue that Cyberlaw as a jurisprudence needs to evolve. I've been interacting with various international lawmakers, jurists, scholars, and majority of them don't even want to talk about it. Why? It's not even emerged. It's not even on the fringes, as what they say. But that's one way of looking at it. The fact remains that darknet today is already center stage. There was a recent story in the press today, a few days back, which said more and more Indians are now going on to the darknet. Why? Because they want to potentially save themselves from being monitored, that's one. But who knows what are they doing, which activities are they doing on the darknet. But I think it's this darknet which will need to be essentially regulated. And it all boils down to how are we going to do it. If I'm Pavan Duggal, and you know I'm Pavan Duggal, that's fine. But if I hide behind various layers of anonymity, and I completely hide my identity, by the time you're going to pierce through the anonymity wheel, I would have moved on miles ahead, done the illegal stuff. I will tell you of an instance. In one jurisdiction, one judge was about to give an order against a dreaded cyber criminal. The judge gave the order, give him life, give him death. Within 48 hours, the judge received a death threat. The death threat originated from the darknet. Despite all the efforts made by the law enforcement of that country, they could not find out who had actually issued that particular threat person. So in a scenario like this, where are we standing? Are we only going to be complicit about the superficial web and say that's it? Today, a majority of these terrorist organizations are increasingly going on to the darknet for the purposes of giving effect to their illegal designs. And I think cyberlaw as a discipline needs to be developed to how do you regulate issues pertaining to the darknet? How do you actually go and pierce through the anonymity wheel? What kind of mechanisms can you adopt? The FBI in the US has been successful in busting the Silk Route website and Silk Route 2.0. And trials have happened and convictions are taking place. But by and large, the other parts of the world, the law enforcement and the judicial approaches have to be far more sensitized in terms of creating capacity building. And the bigger question is, how do I actually provide that this particular act has been done by this particular person? Because even the service providers feign complete helplessness. They say they maintain logs, but they do not know who is the person who's coming on their darknet website. And they cannot even give their identity, even if the law or the law enforcement agencies actually want them to do so. So somewhere down the line, the roles, obligations of service providers on the darknet will have to be looked at. This is not to say that the darknet should not exist. Life is all full of whites, grays, and blacks. So darknet will continue to exist, except it's going to grow far, far more bigger as we go forward. However, How are we at the superficial level going to look at regulating issues pertaining to Darknet? What kind of electronic evidence are we going to collect and produce it before the court of law? And how ultimately we will produce that Mr. A was the real person who was hiding behind 10 layers of encryption, and that Mr. A alone had done that particular work. Look at this gentleman's face. He looks this is sketch, by the way. He looks very innocent, young guy. He got picked up last January from Pune. He was offering cybercrime as a service. So here was a wonderful thing. He made millions of dollars. People will come to his website, order any cyber criminal activity, and he would do it and take the money for that. And lo and behold, this is now the new preferred model. Today, cyber criminals are offering cybercrime as a service. It's the super mall model. You go to the portal, order any cyber criminal activity, and things happen. But what happens to spyware, malware, and spam? I think these have already become cottage industries in different parts of the world, India included. And law, unfortunately, is still far, far behind. So how has the law enforcement been active? They've only been trying to pull down botnets. Okay, that's fine. But how many botnets will you pull down? What will be your success rate? How can you go forward beyond this? So merely pulling down will never be the correct approach as we go forward. You will need to come up with far more proactive approaches of dealing with the same.